Hi, this is Kirk, the Bariatric Carnivore. It's kind of amazing how we can often neglect the big picture when we're trying to discuss important issues like heart health and other issues like that. So let's talk about America's in the last 100 years. We're now celebrating the 100th anniversary of the American Heart Association. It was started back in the 1920s when heart disease was just starting to become an issue. Really, the very first heart attack that was recorded in the United States was around the beginning of the 20th century at Boston Hospital. And it was a big event because nobody ever really died of a heart attack. And they were studying, they're going, how in the heck did that happen? And somehow nobody noticed that there were some big changes going on in the American diet. There's this thing called processed food, particularly crushed wheat and industrialized breads were making it onto the marketplace. Sugar consumption was going through the roof. There was this new product called Crisco, and artificial vegetable oils that are industrial seed oils were making their way into the marketplace and pushing out lard and tallow as the major fats in most people's lives around that time. And smoking was starting to really catch on with these low-cost cigarettes, and they were manipulating the chemicals and making them much smoother, and they were actually adding sugar to them to make them even more addictive. So all these things are all going on, and you've got the doctors different doctors are endorsing cigarette brands. They're pushing artificial oils. They've got doctors saying, hey, make your kids happy, give them lots of sugar, it's lots of energy for them. All this type of stuff is going on, and heart attack rates are going through the roof. Yet somehow people never made that link during that whole time. And there's about 100 years ago, this group of 6 physicians met in Chicago to create the American Heart Association in 1924. And they were trying to promote heart health and all that. It was a very small academic group, only made up of a handful of doctors. And because there wasn't that much demand for cardiologists back then, it wasn't until really in the 40s when things started picking up and more people are dying of heart attacks and people are pulling out their hair going, what's going on? And Procter & Gamble came to the rescue of this small organization and gave them a gift of $1.5 million from their True for Consequences radio show. And that put the American Heart Association on the map, and they switched from being a small group of doctors to this big public advocacy group that was trying to start giving advice on heart health. Surprisingly enough, their advice all depended on you using industrial seed oils. And Ancel Keys starts showing up, pushing this dietary heart hypothesis that we need to reduce the amount of red meat and cholesterol. And everybody's ignoring the fact that we're smoking, drinking, eating a whole bunch of sugar. We're getting this new ultra-processed food. We're getting industrial seed oils all running rampant. And somehow those all get ignored. I mean, here we've existed as a species for maybe millions of years, and there's no heart disease. Suddenly it goes through the roof, and we don't look at what have we changed in the last 40 years. I don't know how they did it, but they didn't. They didn't make that link that these two things may all be going together. So let's move forward to 1955, because this was kind of the pivotal year when it came to heart attacks, because the President of the United States, Dwight Eisenhower, World War II general, getting the best medical care in the planet, suddenly has a heart attack. And his doctor puts him on a bland oatmeal, Melba toast, no red meat type diet, which eventually killed him, but they never stopped him from smoking his 4 packs of Lucky Stripes a day. Somehow they never made that link that might be affecting his heart health. So anyway, to me it's like kind of amazing looking at all that particular era and ignoring the obvious. Anybody who's ever watched the show Mad Men which takes us back to that era, and we look at and we kind of shake our heads in disbelief that people used to smoke in the office all the time. They would drink during lunch. People were drinking alcohol like it was going out of style, and they're eating all this vegetable oil and all this other stuff, and people are starting to have heart attacks like crazy, and somehow they never saw the link between their lifestyle and their heart health. And this kept on continuing until about 1964. And this is where it gets really interesting, because that's when the Surgeon General of the United States released a report showing a link between smoking and heart disease and lung cancer. And they started this big campaign against smoking. At that time, 44% of all adults, it's estimated, smoked. May have been even higher than that. And most of them quit after that event. There was about a 60% reduction in the amount of smoking that was going on. And what's fascinating is when you look at what happened when there was this massive reduction in the number of smokers in this country, there was almost the same amount of reduction in heart attacks. So, we have this big 60% reduction in heart attacks going along with a 60% reduction in smoking, which kind of makes total sense when you think about it. I mean, I don't know why people didn't draw a conclusion that we had a 60% drop, maybe there's a correlation. Maybe they didn't, because big tobacco was still being believed at the time by Congress, and they were the number one funder of all political activity in the country. Big tobacco, we forget what it was like before they started suing tobacco companies. But before then, they funded everything in politics. They also funded NASCAR. They were the ones that funded most of the media. There were ads for their product on all the TV news shows. Well, all of a sudden that got repealed. They couldn't advertise. Major publications quit taking their money. NASCAR, even NASCAR got rid of the Winston Cup. And, they were pushed into the corner, and there was this drop in the number of heart attacks. Everything, that's looking pretty good. And at the same time, there's this vast improvement in technology that is helping people overcome. Even people that had heart attacks were now surviving them thanks to a bunch of brand new technology. We were teaching people how to do CPR, which radically, increased your chance of survival. If you fell on the street, people no longer looked helplessly at it. You could start CPR and help get the heart function going. Then we got the defibrillation paddles that started showing up all over the place. That helped save a lot of people. The amount of gear that they started putting in the hospitals for heart attack patients improved the survivability rate dramatically. We were able to start, we could figure out if somebody was having a diabetic situation or a heart attack almost instantaneously with all this new technology, and the survival rate from heart attacks went up through the roof. And then they created stents and a whole bunch of other stuff. And I'm not attacking cardiologists for what they've done to treat heart attacks, but the recommendations for how to prevent them is where I really get into a serious problem. Because there was another thing that happened, and it happened in the late 80s, going through the 90s. A new class of drugs called statins came out. And I was, in college at the time, and I remember the ads that came out for the first big statins. They had the guy by the name of Jarvik who had created the first artificial heart, and he is touting this thing that it reduces your chances of ever having a heart attack by over 40%, which wasn't true. It was basically a trick of the statin industry. Some marketing guy looked at it and said, we did this test on 10,000 people, and 2 people on, or 3 people had heart attacks that were not on the statins, 2 had it without it. You know what that means? It's a 33% reduction in your heart attack risk. And so they manipulated the numbers to make it look like it was this major reversal of heart attack risk by taking a statin. And that little piece of math made the statin industry $1 trillion. We have spent $1 trillion on statin drugs since the 1990s. Let me ask you a question. Where's the reduction in the number of heart attacks that has occurred since that time? And you're going to hear crickets. I know, look, because of technology and CPR and the defibrillation and all that stuff, the survivability rate of having a heart attack goes up, but still, the number one killer in this country, 1 in 5 people are going to die from heart disease. Despite $1 trillion worth of statins, despite the fact that we have reduced our red meat consumption down to basically about an ounce of red meat per person per day in this country. We've reduced our dietary fat. We've done everything that they have told us to do. We've practically eliminated smoking, yet we're not seeing a reduction in the number of heart attacks. They're going up. Could it be that we are fighting the wrong enemy? And I'm looking at it from my perspective. I can't prove this scientifically because, frankly, nobody's going to spend the money to show that the big problem is industrial seed oils, type 2 diabetes, and all this other stuff. I mean, look, when you go to your doctor, what are they going to ask you about to assess your heart attack risk? They're going to ask you about what's your family history? Well, shoot, virtually everybody's got somebody in their family that died of a heart attack because 1 in 5 Americans is going to die of heart disease. So, and they're going to blame your LDL cholesterol, and because they can give you a statin for that. But is that what's the number one cause of heart attacks? No, what's the number one risk? Type 2 diabetes, poor metabolic health, high blood pressure. These are the things that are really the big problems, yet we're ignoring those because, we got drugs for the blood pressure, but even when you control your high blood pressure through drugs, that doesn't really solve the major problem as far as reducing risk. Yeah, you can reduce your blood pressure, but you still have a lot of the same risks of heart disease. So you look at that totality going, what is their problem? Why isn't the American Heart Association and your cardiologist and your doctor talking to you about lifestyle? Well, frankly, there's no money in it. There's no money in the cure. I mean, it is possible to really end a lot of heart disease by getting rid of type 2 diabetes. And type 2 diabetes can be reversed and eliminated as proven by Virta Health through switching to a high-fat ketogenic diet. They've shown it. They've proved it. And when you do that, you've eliminated the number one risk factor when it comes to heart disease. But there's no money in that. There's lots of money in the treatment of heart disease. There's lots of money for stents. There's lots of money for big hospitals for people who have had heart attacks to monitor them, to get them patched up. They can lower the death rate, and they can put them on a statin. And that's $1 trillion worth of stuff, just with the statins. That's where the money is. There's no money in cures, but there's lots of money in treatments. And that's what we're seeing. And I find it fascinating that UCLA, the head of the cardiology department at UCLA Medical School, did a study. He went and did blood draws of everybody who was basically having a heart attack in this particular week period in Los Angeles, and checked their LDL cholesterol. And it's all over the place. Some people had high, some people had low, some people had average. It didn't make any difference. There was no correlation between their cholesterol level and why they had a heart attack. And his conclusion was we need to lower cholesterol because we can do that because we have drugs for that. If he had checked their A1Cs, he would have probably found that all those were real high because they're probably all diabetics, whether they were diagnosed or not, because that's the number one risk factor. But there's no money in that. And as a result, you're not going to hear about it. Because in this fight for your health, man, you are all alone. Nobody is looking after your health at the end of the day because there's no money in it. And it sucks and it seems unfortunate, but it's the reality. So what can you do? Well, you've got to learn to do this for yourself because frankly, no one's looking after you. Not on the health side. They'll treat you. They will give you drugs, but they're not going to fix you. If you want to be fixed, you have to do that on your own. Because in this fight for our health, we are all alone. But we can all be alone in this together. And if you like this message, please hit the like and subscribe. Join this channel. Join with other like-minded folks that are trying to fix the problem with their health, not just try to pay money for another treatment. I try to put out a couple messages each week. I will talk to you again soon.